Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Thinking Scrubs podcast. I'm your host, Raymond, and with me today is Ian.
Yeah. Hello, guys.
And today we're going to dive into another episode of faction orientation.
Hey. I wonder which faction are we looking at today?
It's the one highlighted on the lower right. So, for those who are unfamiliar with faction orientation, this series tries to tackle the question: if you're a new player and you're just coming into the game, what faction should I get into? So, each episode of faction orientation dives into a specific faction, tries to get to know them a little better, shows
Mhm,
their strengths and weaknesses, and if you're a new player and you like what you hear for this faction, maybe this faction is for you.
mhm. Essentially, would like to convince or dissuade you from this faction. Let us know in the comments after watching this video whether you want to be taking on this faction or would you like to play against this faction. We'll have to see.
Yep. So, talking about this faction this week or today, we're talking about the First Order, the primary antagonists
Yes.
of the new trilogy.
The first order.
Yes, the most memeable faction, definitely. So, I've know these. I haven't noticed a lot of First Order factions out there in the meta right now. Do you? Have you seen a lot, Ian?
Not really. There's not a lot of people who fly first order ships, and I think there's a reason behind that. We'll look into that later. But in the recent stats, I think there's only one out of the top 16 that made it into the finals also. So that's pretty uncommon for a first order. But hey, at least they're still represented in the top 16.
Yes, better than zero.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so before we dive further, let's introduce you as our First Order judge, or
Okay.
sorry, mentor. So, Ian, you've previously been on the show to talk about the Galactic Empire, but now you're here also to talk about the First Order. Would you share
Yes.
with us your experience and background on the First Order or playing them as a faction in X Wing?
Well, yeah. Since if you watched the previous video, I did mention that I advocate for the antagonists in the Star Wars saga, and that doesn't differ from the First Order. I think First Order only has a few ships, but I have all of those ships, and they're quite fun to fly. And I think I've been flying First Order for about a year or so. I've had a few games in, but I haven't played any tourneys with First Order yet.
But definitely lots of opportunities in the future. We have other
Yes.
FO players as well in the community here in the Philippines, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's not totally uh, a relic faction or whatever. But
Yes,
yeah,
it's not. There are. It's still represented, and as a treat, maybe we'll try to film some First Order battle reports soon, also.
true. Now let's dive right into who the First Order is or are. Is it are or is? But anyway, is.
The First
Okay.
Order.
So as I mentioned before, they are the primary antagonists of the new trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
The most iconic villain being Kylo Ren,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the new First Order stormtroopers are represented as well. Our supreme leader Snoke,
Supreme Leader Snoke,
and
who has apparently a very nice look, very young on that photo there.
don't judge a book by its cover, you know.
Okay, okay.
Just because he died in like less than 30 minutes. But okay, and also let's not forget Captain Phasma.
Yes. I think how familiar are you with the First Order? lore wise only. Like from watching movies, like if you've watched the series, what's the new series called?
Resistance.
The Resistance, yeah. And if you've read books, have you read books about the First Order?
Personally, no, but I read some wiki on it. From what I can
Oh,
tell, they're of course remnants of the first Galactic Republic.
mm-hmm,
I think based on the lore, after the original trilogy, they got exiled to the outer regions or something.
mm-hmm.
And
Well, um, I've read the book Phasma. If you're familiar with it, it elaborates how Phasma got into First Order, the similarities of First Order with the Empire, but they're technically more radical to the point where they can be considered as fascists. Well, I think uh, that'll be another take on it. But I do like the First Order because first, as you've said, it's memeable, and secondly, I like the uh, teenage angst Kylo Ren expresses, and of course, First Order has some cool tech with them also. So, First Order is a great faction to start with.
do you think that the their ideology is pretty much the same with the Galactic Empire, or is it more of a trying to return to glory kind of thing?
Well, it's uh I'm not sure, but it's really an extreme of an extreme. Like they want to dominate everything. For the empire, they want to enforce peace by conquering. Where in here, they just want to trample on everything.
Right, right. So what's worse than it's like revenge? It's like the revenge of the villain that you cast away previously. They just come back hungry and more
Yeah.
evil and more tyrannical. And that's I think what makes the First Order scarier than the Empire,
Yes.
because they're the ones who are hungry.
And they're really trying to prove themselves.
That's right. So okay, enough with unless you want to add some more to the lore.
I think we'll have to see in the upcoming episode 9 on how the First
Yes.
Order actually unfolds. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, so there are a lot. Yeah, interestingly, there are a lot more stories to tell with the First Order since the movies are relatively new,
Yes,
and
yes.
hopefully the new movie and the new whatever series will come out eventually will explain more on their background as well.
Yes. I'm curious as to the progress of First Order as a faction, and we'll probably see more uh, lore behind it also.
True. Okay. Now moving into the strengths and weaknesses of the ships
Mm-hmm.
of the faction as a whole. So the first thing we mentioned here is that they have high damage output ships.
Yes.
So would you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm. Um, Come to think of it, I'm just taking one ship in context here, and that would be the Upsilon class command shuttle. It has a native 4 red dice attack, and it has an innate ability of linked battery, which says while you perform a cannon attack, roll one additional red die. So if you have someone right in that arc, they're going to be facing at least 5 dice if you have all those conditions fulfilled, of course. And for me, 5 dice, you're guaranteeing at least one. Hopefully, what are the chances, right? That you get to roll all blanks or roll all focuses on that. So high damage output for one ship is good. I
Well,
think I can
but
also well
yeah, I think it's not just the Upsilon. I mean, of course, we have the Silencer
yes.
and we have the uh, s- Special
Special
Forces
forces TIE fighter.
TIE.
Yes.
Yeah.
For
So
the
even
for
though they roll two attack dice, I mean, they innately have a cool ability which makes them effective on damage output,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So the
For
silencer has the native three, and the special forces has the front and back turret
mm-hmm.
that
Yes.
you get
For
for free.
these yes for this special forces Tie Fighter, you can actually shoot twice. The first one is in the front, and the one in the back if you have the special gunner turret. And for Kylo ship, the Tie Silencer, it's a very dodgy ship. Not to mention, it also has a native 3 die, which is actually still quite good for an ace of its kind.
And I would say that the silencer is actually the tankiest arc dodging ship
Yes,
there is.
yes,
I
it
mean, it has
very
four
is.
and two and three defense dice.
Hmm.
Who has that?
No one else. If you
Yeah,
want that, you should really pick this faction.
and it has the alt thrusters ability, right? So
Yes, it lets you reposition also. So if you made a bad move, you can somehow redeem yourself and reposition wisely.
yep. And of course, the next point you mentioned is the effective retaliation tactics.
Yes, for the first order, I think they would capitalize. If you damage them, be sure to expect some form of retaliation, be it in an extra attack, an action that they're going to take, extra token modifier, or probably something along those lines. And for me, that is the strength because if your ships get damaged, which they, of course, they will, it's a game, of course, and it's really hard to arc dodge in X-Wing 2.0. It's not impossible, but you'll likely get hit, and for that you have to capitalize on that. And the First Order does a good job in uh, making sure you pay when you inflict pain on that on their ships.
Kinda very thematic, actually. Like we were just talking about how they're like the revenge faction, and retaliation is their main weapon against the other factions.
Yes, they sure are very motivated in in dealing damage if you've hurt them. Also,
Yep.
they tend to amplify what you've dealt to them.
And next you mentioned is that has relatively good shields.
Hmm. For the record, this is only for the record. All First Order ships have shields. So which faction um, has that feature also? I don't think there are, right?
Yeah, not a lot.
Not a lot. Well,
So
yeah. I mean, that's been yeah, they're relatively good shields. It's still a good tactic since I don't really know the exact points cost of shield and on on how worth a shield is, but if it cancels crits and hits, I think that is a good choice for me.
fair enough, fair enough. Well, I mean, even if their base TIE fighter is already shielded, even with one,
Mm-hmm.
it already makes a TIE fighter that's, not hard to, that's pretty hard to kill on the onset, much harder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. But, the Thai SF fighter, the Thai FO fighter, no, Thai FO fighter has the same qualities as the Empires, but it has one more shield. So if it has a lot of green dice already and you add the shield on top of that, that is going to be extra tanky. But they're somehow killable, but it makes them survive turn or two longer.
And once again, that ties into their um, ability wherein you want them to get hit but not die, of course.
Yeah.
So you can trigger their nasty
Yeah.
abilities.
Yes.
And we have here also they have a wide access to wide firing arcs. What did
Hmm.
you mean by this?
Um, since there are actually a few choices here. One is the it's an this is an interest take, and do correct me if I'm wrong. The Upsilon has four native die arc, right? For
Yep.
four native red attack dice, and it has the stop ability. And essentially, if you stop, you cast a wider net on your arc because you're technically letting them move into your arc first before you move a turn later because you stop this turn. Also, for the Thai SF, it has an interesting take because if you take the Special Forces Gunner, you can shoot on your front and in the back on the same turn. So that's actually pretty forgiving for a new player if you think you're not going to catch someone on your front arc. You might as well point the turret backwards so you'll have a chance and you'll cover at least or a great 50% of your range.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And let's not also discount that the silencer has an access to a wide firing arc because he can reposition into the firing arc that he
Yes,
wants.
yes, yes. For the Thai silencer, they can really it can really move a lot. It has the capabilities to calibrate its attack to the left, to the right, for boost, of course. And of course, we all know those little boosts and little barrel rolls do affect firing arcs a lot.
Yep, fair enough. And also, only the second faction in the game to access tech slot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I think
Only them.
the other end is resistance, right?
Yes.
Yes. Tech slot is a significant slot for ships. It has unique um, how do you explain?
Upgrades.
Yeah, it has unique upgrades that allow you to have that extra oomph, I don't know, extra power to push the damage or negate damage. So I do like the effects of tech slots, and it's unique in a way that it is somehow modern or a newer form of technology that is exclusive for the newer factions also.
Well, fair enough since um, only two factions can use these slots. You're already more advanced than for the rest of the slots, right?
Yes, yes.
And it's not. And let's face it, those tech slots are I mean, most of them are pretty good. I
Yes.
I
Yes.
I think only one of them I don't like, which is Prime Thrusters, which is uber expensive. But other than that, everything else still pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's good actually. One of the interesting take is the biohexacrypt codes. It says here while you coordinate or jam, if you have a lock on a ship, you may spend that lock to choose that ship, ignoring range restrictions. One thing that makes this good on first order is because you can perform this action early on and already amplify the power of, let's say, a Thai silencer later in the game since you've banked early on using that biohexacrypt code.
And it's only 1 point too.
Yes. And of course, it requires good practice to when to execute, and of course, but at least you have this available in your arsenal.
Yep. And the last but not the least you are mentioning is the
Mm-hmm.
strongest faction talent. What is fanatical anyway? For those, of course, are not aware what is fanatical.
Mm-hmm. Let me read the fanatical. Let me just find it here. Here, it costs 2 points if at the making of this video. While you perform a primary attack, if you are not shielded, you may change one focus to a hit result. One focus to a hit result if you are not shielded.
So
And I
just two
think,
points too.
yeah, 2 points too. What I think is um, why this is strong. Most of the factions bank on good early game to somehow erase a ship or deal damage to or focus fire on a ship, while First Order usually has a late game uh, strategy with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, on that. So you want to get rid of your shields, or maybe you can joust someone, but just lose the shields. And later on, if when you're chasing them down, when you're making kill boxes, you essentially get one focus turned into a hit, and that could spell all the difference, of course. For just 2 points on, and it is accessible for all ships also. So I think it's thematic and strong at the same time.
Yeah, and there's no range restriction, there's no arc restriction.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, any ship with a talent slot, of course,
Mm-hmm.
can carry this
Mm-hmm.
and automatically just convert one focus. That's it, just for free.
This is actually that I'm saying it's arguably one of the strongest because I haven't really utilized other factions. Let's say for Empire's Ruthlessness, I think a hit point is really hard to sacrifice for possible damage. While in Separatist also, I'm not sure if that's good enough as good as this. How about for other factions? What are your take on their
For
talent?
Rebels, we have Selfless there, which is 3 points. It's decent as well, but it's not really for free because you're just transferring it from one person to another. So
Oh,
there's
yes,
really
trade-off.
there's a
Yeah.
trade-off, yeah. And Resistance, we have Heroic, which is also a trade-off. Is you actually have to roll bad to get it to work.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, and Dedicated, wherein you only get to reroll one dice for a friend, and you get stressed. Strained. Sorry, strained. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's see. So a lot more caveats in the other factions.
Hmm.
Famous.
Well, this one is almost guaranteed to happen, right?
Yep.
Because eventually you'll lose your shields. It's just a matter of how fast are you gonna lose your shields.
Hopefully not fast enough in
Hopefully
order
not
to
that
get this one.
fast. Hopefully slow as the turns progress. So yes, those are the strengths of the First Order, and we'll take a peek at some of their weaknesses also. I think for me, the First Order has always been on the lower tier of the power level of among all other factions, and this is because of these following reasons.
Hmm. The first one being
Uh,
small selections of ships, and in effect, also small selection of pilots, right?
Yes. Here, as mentioned, their small selection of ships is actually just based on the sequels. So you're essentially limiting the FFGs limited to the releases that are actually shown by Disney in the new movies, and that's very small. That's not a wide array of ships. So
Yeah, so they
you're
only
just
have
forced to.
4 ships right now.
They just have four options right now. That's not practically encouraging when you're uh, playing X-Wing
Against
for a
factions
long
that
time.
have like
Yes,
10 ships or
yes.
11
But if you're a
to
new
choose from.
player, it's a good faction to start with because you will be completing the number of ships early on.
Oh, that's true. If you want a small collection,
You
this is
want a
the
small
smallest you
collection.
can get.
Just four, yes. And also their pilots. If you've noticed their conversion kit, it's thinner, right? Almost 1/3 thick of the scums and the empires and rebels. And there's not a whole lot of cardboard in there, but it does contain the pilots that are required to play. I think they only have around 7 to 8 pilots, but with the incoming pilot packs, I think we'll have more options. So
Yeah,
maybe
and
that'll
of course,
compensate for that.
the new movies will come out. Hopefully, new ships will spawn from
Hopefully,
that.
fingers crossed. Yes.
Yes, and we already have one, the Major Von Reg's tie, right? That's
Yes, yes. We're looking forward to that.
so
It's not
that's
actually seen in the movie, is it?
it. No, it's from Resistance, the
Oh,
show.
right. Von Rag. Okay. Yes.
So yeah, still lots of room to grow. So if you want to take a chance on this ship, on this faction, you have a solid start.
Most of their pilots also are not not as known because it relies you heavy some heavy reading on some Disney books. But I myself am familiar because I've read, as I said, some books, Phasma, the some other Star Wars books that are the sequels based, not the expanded universe. But yeah, we still have to orient ourselves with First Order.
And so next is actually the inverse of its strength, which is requiring a high amount of risk appetite.
Yes. Uh, for the First Order, you can't play as conservatively as other factions. Here, for you to be able to dish out more damage, you got to take some damage also.
So
That's
it's a high risk, high reward kind of
it's
thing,
a I think this is one of the highest risk-taking factions in X-Wing 2.0 right now. For the First Order to take some actions and for it to trigger, you have to stress yourself. You have to give yourself a whole slew of red tokens just to pump out damage. And if you don't know how to manage that, that's going to be a little too overwhelming, especially to new players. Even I myself, I have played with First Order, and I've made some bad calls myself, which costed me the game actually.
Fair enough, fair enough. But if you are still into that kind of thing, then this could be
Mhm.
a good thing for you, right?
Yes, you can actually be blinded by rage, and just joust and hope for the best.
Which leads us to our next weakness is their heavy reliance on good variants.
hmm For any thoughts on this, Raymond?
Well, as you mentioned, taking negative effects, you're just hoping for the best outcome. So that's really not relying more on your playing, but more of the dice rolling there. If
Yes. For the let's go back to the Upsilon. Its native 4 dice. Red dice is still chance based, right? We know that red dice can sometimes be really fickle. Sometimes you roll all blanks and just scratch your head and move on. But you need extra modifiers. You need extra tokens to modify those dice and hope for a better or the best result. So, of course, there are mechanics and extra upgrades that you might want to take for an advantage, but somehow First Order relies on good dice, and you find yourself crossing your fingers while your other hand is rolling the dice.
yeah, but if you're extremely lucky as a player, then
Mm-hmm.
once again, this could be the faction for you.
Yes, yes. I think the days when I really feel lucky, I tend to lean on playing First Order.
Right. And sorry, what's this last one? Needs extra knowledge on trade-offs.
Yes. Here, as mentioned earlier, and somehow relates to item number 2 in the weakness. For here, you have to be wise or probably intelligent on when to take those trade-offs. Let's say, I think this is better explained as for an example.
Go ahead.
Let's take quick draw an example. Here it says after you lose a shield, you may spend one charge. If you do, you may perform a bonus primary attack. This I think quick draw is one of the ships or the pilots that you take on when you fly First Order. Here, when she, I think quick draw is a she, she loses a shield, you spend one charge. Okay, taking that one charge, it regens every turn, right? So
Yep.
you want to lose your shield one per turn only. So you want to risk it, but you don't want to risk a lot. And if you don't know the trade-off, you'll probably lose more shields than before you can trigger a quick draws ability. So
So
I
it's
think
really
that's
the mastery of mastery of caution.
yes, yes. And for let's cite one more example here. Lieutenant Tabson, he's flying the Upsilon class command shuttle. After you suffer damage, you may spend one charge to perform an action. And there's a whole slew in this action bar: focus, target lock, reinforce, coordinate, and jam. And of course, you also, although he has 6 shields, which probably is a lot to go through. You also have 2 charges, so every time you lose a shield, you can use one charge, and 2 charges. You initially have 2 charges, so you can actually perform 2 actions if you get damage. So you need to know which action to take here. And since there are 5 actions, sometimes you get analysis paralysis. Should I take focus? Should I reinforce? Or probably do I coordinate for a later on attack? And that could be overwhelming, but if you practice your lists before, you can actually master it.
Mm, fair enough. Does that this can you still do that even if you're stressed, or is it just when you just take
You
damage
still can't perform
actions when you're
actions if you're
stressed?
yes, yes.
Okay, so yeah, it's also on this. So you should also should know when you should
Stop.
when you're getting stop and when you're getting shot at, so that you can still perform your abilities.
Yes, sometimes those little things you forget um, might not or might make your risk not pay off. So that's how I'm going to term it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So in conclusion, it seems that if you were to pick, if I were a new player, and you were going to tell me why I should pick this faction, you would say the following.
Mm-hmm.
One, you like retaliation tactics, as we
Tactics.
mentioned. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then,
For this, I think retaliation tactics is good for a beginner actually, because you won't be flying optimally. You won't be arc dodging a lot, but you just have to know when your upgrade is going to be triggered, which actually relates to the second point.
being triggered is
Being
what you
triggered.
fancy.
Yes. Here, I think FFG still doesn't allow taking notes during games, right?
Mm,
So if
yeah.
you like memorizing, a stress triggers this,
Hello.
or an action triggers. Yes. Can you still hear me?
Yep. Still there.
Okay. Yes. So being uh, triggered in a way that your upgrades are triggered, not you as a player is triggered.
I actually thought it was me. Talking about the player here, but okay. Okay, and then the next point is fortressing or castling. So, did the first order like, being in a fortressy kind of approach all the time or formation?
um, for first order, it really limits yourself to a few archetypes, right? And essentially, if you take the Upsilon, you're forced to slow roll. If you take a lot of first order TIE fighters, you're forced to fly in formation. And sticking to the point here, you're
And
mhm. You can only optimize trade-offs if you engage in your own turn. So most of the time, you will be able to get that if
hello,
you if you fortress or if you castle.
Ian, still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay,
Am I?
sorry. Could you
Am I
repeat
cutting
that
off?
one?
Once again, if you're fortressing or castling, you are essentially forcing the other player to engage on your own terms. And if you engage on your own terms, you'll be able to optimally utilize the trade-offs for the first order.
Mm. That is interesting. So, because you're really more of like the setup kind of faction wherein I want this to be my fighting ground, my hunting ground, and you always want to have to determine the rules of engagement.
Hmm. And I think fortressing is illegal right now, so you actually have to bend the rules a bit and position your ships in such a way that you move a little also, so that
Well,
you won't be called out on it.
okay, so for the new players here, fortressing means is that you just stay in one position for a number of turns. But in this context, we're meaning what we mean is that a formation wherein
You slow
you're
roll it.
slow rolling,
You only
or
try
you're
to
trying to.
move as little as possible um, if you don't want to engage the enemy yet.
Yes, we're not saying that you should not move at all, but the
It could
goal
help.
here,
It could
it,
help. Yes.
yeah. And lastly, is to choose the appropriate upgrade. And
I
I guess
think.
this
Okay.
is in line what we discussed, since you have a lot of unique upgrades and abilities that work just for your faction. You just really know when to use those and when to choose those to apply to your faction. Am
Mhm.
I right, Ian?
Yes, you are definitely correct. And for that, actually, because they also have a limited number of pilots and ships, you are forced to take upgrades. You have to compensate such a way that you don't have this kind of pilot, so you have to take this kind of upgrade instead. You have to add this kind of armament instead. So you have to, most of the time you'll find yourself browsing more on the tech slots and upgrades just because of limited ships and limited pilots.
Okay. And so we move into the next portion of our video wherein we discuss some basic ships to start with, which I think
Mm-hmm.
we've already talked about previously, but
Mm-hmm.
let's start with the first most
Mm-hmm.
recognizable pilot in this
Mm-hmm.
faction,
Would you like
Kylo Ren.
to discuss that, or should I?
You go ahead,
Okay.
Kylo Ren.
With Kylo Ren, here is a very ace ship, although it only has initiative 5. But I'll show you the dark side condition is one of the most OP overpowered cards in X-Wing 1.0. Essentially, it allows you to pick a pilot damage from the damage deck, and if you score a hit, you place that pilot damage uh, instead of the usual drawing from the damage deck. So if you really want a specific damage or negative buff, should I say, to an opponent's opposite ace, then you might as well use Kylo Ren for that.
Yep. And let's not forget, he's the only one there with. He's the only ship with force in this
Yes,
faction.
yes. So far, yes.
And next we have, of course, Lieutenant Tabson.
Yes, Lieutenant Babson. As mentioned earlier, you suffer damage and you get to perform one action. We all know that actions in X-Wing is something precious, especially when you want to dish out more damage or make the other ships reposition or give a negative buff to your enemies also. This isn't a ship that will go down easily. Most of the time, um, this Upsilon shuttle is the ship that will survive just because it has a hunk of HP also. And the Tabson for its points, I think one of the better choices for First Order.
And look at that slew of actions. Man, that ship can do so many things. It can jam, coordinate, reinforce.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's probably no chance that you won't need some of those actions in game.
Yes. But hey, at least they're available.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
lastly, our ace pilot
Hmm.
for
Our Ace
versus
Pilot Quick Draw,
for first order, yeah,
first
is
order.
quick draw.
Hmm. Quick Draw is one of the most picked pilot in first order. I think about 90% of first order lists has quick draw. And I think this is because it's easy to utilize this her ability. After you lose a shield, you may spend one charge. If you do, you may perform a bonus primary attack. Some people will tend to flank or fly quick draw on the enemy side and maybe just be grazed by laser or blaster fire, and then you lose one shield and you'll be able to perform another attack. And usually, if you're that good, you can probably equip special what's that, Forces Gunner card, which allows you to roll one extra die. And if you're at range one, you get to roll additional die. So essentially, you're rolling four dice, and if you lose one shield, you roll another four dice. So that's quite powerful.
Yeah, and let's face it, bonus attacks in X-Wing are limited and not cheap.
Yes.
So having one free on your ship as a native ability
Mhm.
is a big bonus.
Yes, and as a potential also is it's because if you like quick draw and if you're not as good in positioning, you actually take a shield upgrade. I think that's the only reason they take shield upgrade with quick draw is because you can trigger it so that you can trigger it more times.
Yes, and then let's not forget also actually the TIE fighter, Special Forces TIE fighter can fire missiles out its back arc, right?
Yes, that's something. So sometimes it's a good strategy to just fly past your opponent and move your turret backwards and then shoot missiles from there. And I think that's a viable strategy.
Yeah, because it's free. It's part of your linked action bar, which is white. So
Yeah,
you can
so
do that every turn if
yes,
you want, right?
that's a good ship
It
actually.
Yeah, it's the only ship that can do that. Fire missiles out the back.
Yes, very. We like to recommend these set of ships, which is actually 75% of the ship selection of First Order. So if you're going to start this faction, you might as well get all ships here.
That's right. Just go buy a first order expansion. Sorry, conversion kit.
Just go
Get.
buy one of each, and you have a list.
Are they out each individually though? No, not. Are they? I'm not sure. Maybe
Yeah,
not yet.
maybe not yet.
Okay, but soon enough it'll be easier to complete.
Yes.
And so that concludes our faction orientation for the first order.
Yes, for that I think we summarized it well. If they have additional comments or additional thoughts on the first order, they can tell us in the comments, right?
That's right. And if you like this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully, we'll come out with more content in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to give any shout outs before we go, Ian?
Shout out to the person who's hosting the advanced screening of episode 9. It's because we have was that the
Metro Manila Film
Metro Manila
Festival.
Film Festival that's blocking the Star Wars screening. So yeah, we approve of that guy, whoever he is.
Yeah, whoever you are, thank you. So until next time,
Mm-hmm.
once again, I'm Raymond,
This
and
is Ian
and we're the Thinking Scrubs. Signing off.
signing off. See you.
Bye.
Bye.